as good as dead, that it was up to him who lived and died, and when, and where. In the evening, around 9, he drove over to Brooklyn, his old stomping grounds, right into Junior Maggioni's neighborhood, his turf in Carroll Gardens. He was thinking about his old buddy Jimmy Hatz, and missing him some, figuring that Maggioni's father had probably popped Jimmy. Somebody had, and then made the body disappear, as if Jimmy had never been born. He'd always suspected it had been Maggioni Sr., so that was another score for the butcher to settle. It was building up inside him, this terrible rage about something, maybe about his father, the original butcher of Sligo, that piece of Irish scum who had ruined his life before he was 10 years old. He turned onto Maggioni Street, and he had to smile to himself. The powerful Don still lived like a mildly successful plumber, or maybe a local electrician, in a yellow brick 2-family house. More surprising, he didn't spot any guards posted on the street. So either Junior was seriously underestimating him, or his people were damn good at hiding themselves in plain sight. Hell, maybe somebody had a sniper rifle sight pinned on his forehead right now. Maybe he had a couple of seconds to live. The suspense was killing him. He had to see what was going on here. So he hit his car horn once, twice, 3 times, and not a goddamn thing happened. Nobody shot him through the skull, and for the first time, the butcher let himself think, I might win this fight after all. He'd figured out the first mystery. Junior Maggioni had moved his family out of the house. Maggioni was running too. Then he stopped that train of thought with just one word. Mistake. He couldn't make any. Not one misstep from now until this was all over. If he did, he was dead. Simple as that. End of story.
Chapter 91. It was late, and I decided to go for a drive in the R350. I was loving the car. The kids felt the same way. Even Nana did, praise the Lord. I found myself thinking about Maria again. The long investigation into her murder I had conducted and failed at. I was messing with my own mind, trying to picture her face, trying to hear the exact sound of her voice. Later that night, back at home, I tried to get to sleep, but couldn't. It got so bad that I went downstairs and watched Diary of a Mad Black Woman again. Actually, I found myself cheering like a crazy person at the flickering TV screen. Tyler Perry's movie matched up perfectly with my frame of mind. I called up Tony Woods at the director's office around 9 the next morning. Then I swallowed my pride and asked Tony for some help on the rape and murder case. I needed to find out if the Bureau had anything on the contract killer called the Butcher, anything that might be helpful to Sampson and me, maybe something classified. We knew you'd call one of these days, Alex. Director Burns is eager to work with you again. You up for some consulting? Just light stuff. It's your call what and where, especially now that you're taking on cases again. Who said I'm taking on cases? This is a special situation, I told Tony. The Butcher probably murdered my wife years ago. It's the one case I can't leave unsolved. I understand. I do understand. We'll try to help if we can. I'll get you what you need. Tony arranged for me to use the office of an agent who was out of town, and he said it was okay if I wanted to start a dialogue with an FBI researcher-analyst named Monty Donnelly. I already talked to Monty, I told him. We know you did. Monty told us. We cleared it for her now. Officially. The next couple of days, I pretty much lived in the FBI building. Turned out the Bureau had quite a lot on Michael Sullivan, the Butcher. His file included dozens of photographs. One problem was that the photos were 5 to 7 years old, and there didn't seem to have been any contact with Sullivan recently. Where had he disappeared to? I did learn that Sullivan grew up in a part of Brooklyn known as the Flatlands. His father had been a real butcher there. I even got the names of some old contacts and friends of Sullivan's from his days in New York. What I read of Sullivan's backstory was curious. He'd attended parochial schools through 10th grade, and he'd been a good student, even though he never seemed to work at it. Then Sullivan dropped out of school. He took up with the mafia and was one of the few non-Italians to break in. He wasn't a made man, but he was well paid. Sullivan earned in the six figures when he was in his early 20s and became John Maggione Sr.'s go-to hitman. His son, the current Don, had never approved of Sullivan. Then something strange and disturbing to all concerned started to happen. There were reports of Michael Sullivan torturing and mutilating the bodies of victims, murdering a priest and a layman accused of misconduct with boys at his old grade school, a couple of other vigilante hits, a rumor that Sullivan might have murdered his own father, who disappeared from his shop one night and whose body had never been found to this day. Then Sullivan seemed to completely disappear off the Bureau's radar screen. Monty Donnelly agreed with my assessment, that Sullivan might have become somebody's informer in the Bureau. It was possible that the FBI or the New York police was protecting him, even that Sullivan might be in witness protection. Was that what had happened to Maria's killer? Was he somebody's snitch? Was the FBI protecting the butcher? Chapter 92.
John Maggione Jr. was a proud man, too showy at times, too cocksure, but he wasn't stupid, and he wasn't usually careless. He was aware of the current situation involving the mad dog hitman his father had used back in the day, the butcher, an Irishman of all things. But even his crazy old man had tried to eliminate Michael Sullivan once he found out how dangerous and unpredictable he was. Now the job would be done, and it had to be done right away. Sullivan was still on the loose, Maggione knew. As an extra safeguard against him, he'd moved his family out of the house in South Brooklyn. They were living at the compound in Mineola on Long Island. He was there with them now. The house was a brick colonial, waterfront, on a quiet cul-de-sac. It had its own dock on the channel and a speedboat, Cecilia Teresa, named after his first child. Although the compound's location was well known, the gates around the place were secure, and Maggione had doubled his bodyguards. He felt good about the safety of his family. The butcher was only one guy, after all. Realistically, how much damage could he do? How much more damage? Junior had plans to go into work later in the morning, then make his regular stop at the social club in Brooklyn. It was important for him to keep up appearances. Besides, he was sure he had things under control now. He had assurances from his people. Sullivan would be dead soon, and so would his family. At 11 in the morning, Maggione was swimming in the indoor pool at the compound. He'd already done 30 laps and planned to do 50 more. His cell phone began to ring on the chaise lounge. Nobody else was around, so finally he climbed out of the pool and answered it himself. "Yeah, what?" "Maggione." He heard a male voice on the line. "Who the hell is this?" he asked, even though he knew who it was. "This happens to be Michael Sullivan, Chief." The nerve of the cheeky bastard, huh? Maggione was quietly stunned that the madman was actually calling him again. "I think we better talk," he said to the hitman. "We are talking. Know how come? You sent killers after me. First in Italy, then they came near my house in Maryland. They shot at my kids. Then they showed up in Washington looking for me. Because I'm supposed to be a loose cannon? You're the loose cannon, Junior. You're the one who needs to be put down." "Listen, Sullivan." "No, you listen, you asshole punk bastard. You listen to me, Junior. There's a package arriving at your fortress right about now. Check it out, Chief. I'm coming after you. You can't stop me. Nothing can stop me. Nobody can. I'm crazy, right? You try and remember that. I'm the craziest bastard you ever met or even heard of. And we will meet again." Then the butcher hung up on him. Junior Maggione put on a robe. Then he walked out to the front of the house. He couldn't believe it. FedEx was making a delivery. That meant that the crazy bastard Sullivan might be watching the house right now. Was that possible? Could it be happening just like he said it would? "Vincent! Mario! Get your asses out here!" he called to his bodyguards, who came running from the kitchen holding sandwiches. He had one of his men open the delivery box out in the pool house. After a couple of nervous moments, the guy called out, "It's pictures, Mr. Maggioni. It's not exactly Kodak moments."
Chapter 93. We might have found him, sugar. A woman named Emily Coro had just finished her morning therapy session with me, and she'd gone off to her teaching job, hopefully with a slightly better self-image. Now Samson was on my cell phone. Big John didn't usually get excited, so this had to be something good. Turned out it was. Late that afternoon, the big man and I arrived in the Flatland section of Brooklyn. We proceeded to locate a neighborhood tavern called Tommy McGoey's. The neat and clean gin mill was nearly empty when we walked inside. Just a tough-looking Irish bartender and a smallish, well-built guy, probably mid-40s, sitting at the far end of a well-polished mahogany bar. His name was Anthony Molino, and he was a graphic artist in Manhattan who'd once been best pals with Michael Sullivan. We sat down on either side of Molino, pinning him in. "Cozy," he said and smiled. "Hey, I'm not gonna run out on you guys. I came here of my own free recollection. Try not to forget it. Hell, 2 of my uncles are cops here in Crooklyn. Check it out if you want." "We already did," Samson said. "One's retired, living in Myrtle Beach. One's on suspension." "Hey, so I'm batting 500. That's not so awful. Keep you in the big leagues." Samson and I introduced ourselves, and at first Molino was sure he knew John from somewhere, but couldn't place where it might be. He said he'd followed the case of the Russian mafia head called the Wolf, an investigation I'd worked on while I was at the Bureau, and which had played out right here in New York. "I read about you in some magazine, too," he said. "What magazine was that?" "I didn't read the story," I said. "In Esquire." Molino got the joke and laughed in a way that was like speeded-up coughing. "So how did you find out about me and Sully? That's kind of a stretch nowadays. Ancient history." Samson told him a little bit of what we knew, that the FBI had done audio surveillance on a social club frequented by John Maggioni, Jr. We knew that Maggioni had ordered a hit on Sullivan, probably because of the butcher's unorthodox methods, and that the butcher had retaliated. The Bureau asked around on Bay Parkway. Your name came up. Molino didn't even wait for Samson to finish. I noticed that when he talked, his hands were in constant motion. "Right, the social club over in Bensonhurst. You been there? Old Italian neighborhood. Mostly 2-story buildings, storefronts, you know. Seen better days, but still pretty nice. Sully and I grew up not far from there." "So how do I fit in again? I'm a little confused about that part. I haven't seen Mike in years." "FBI files," I said. "You're his friend, right?" Molino shook his head. "When we were kids, we were kinda close. That was a long time ago, guys." "You were friends into your 20s. And he still keeps in touch," I said. "That's the information we were given." "Oh, Christmas cards," Molino said and laughed. "Go figure that one out. Sully's a complicated guy, totally unpredictable. He sends a holiday card now and then. What else is going on here? Am I in trouble? I'm not, am I?" "We know that you have no association with the mob, Mr. Molino," Samson said. "That's good to hear, because I don't. Never did. Actually, I'm a little tired of all the bullshit slurring against us Italians. Bada bing, all that crap. Sure, some guys talk like that. You know why? Because it's on the TV. "So tell us about Michael Sullivan," I said. "We need to hear whatever you know about him, even things from the old days." Anthony Molino ordered another drink, seltzer water, from Tommy McGoey himself. Then he began to talk to us, and it came easily for him. The words, anyway. "I'll tell you a funny thing, a story. I used to be Mikey's protector in grammar school. Immaculate Conception, this was. Irish Christian brothers. In our neighborhood, you had to develop a pretty good sense of humor to keep out of fights every other day. Back then, Sullivan didn't have much of one, a sense of humor. He also had this mortal fear about having his front teeth knocked out.